I printed, I can't remember how many. Probably too many. I think we have, so I'm not coming up and getting this while you're talking. I'll put these in here. I don't know how many people will be here today. Yeah. I have mornings though when I'm looking for we can't see what comes. Yeah, and I think, as long as you're comfortable, now we don't know, whether it's, but I would also say that something, but yeah, I think well, and the thing that all those other people, yeah, well, I have to be sure I do not have to. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's that bad, but it's still. I always put that in my well, I start doing that because you read all the yeah, or I started and I'm like, when did I start doing this? And I never do that. And I'm like, that's that. So.
All right. Do you feel ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll let you go.
Okay.
Was your both your coffee?
No, those are just leftover from something. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I think
Yeah. All right, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started now. Thank you so much for coming to Aspire this afternoon. So as you all know, I'm Katie Darrington. I'm the Outcomes Research Fellow shared between CU and Kaiser. We have our lovely Deanna back in a leg brace. So I'm happy to have her back because I am certainly no Deanna. She is much better at coordinating things than I am. So today we'll be discussing data collection tools. I did just get back from the ACCP meeting, so I'm a little hoarse in my voice. I'll see if we can maybe take a break 45 minutes in or so to get some water and stretch maybe. But if you can't hear me, definitely raise your hand and tell me to speak louder because that's important for me. I want you guys to be able to hear what I'm saying, obviously. So we'll be talking about data collection tools today. Obviously, there's other data collection tools than Excel, but we're going to spend the majority of today talking about Excel, giving you guys a really good toolkit with which you can use to manipulate Excel spreadsheets, do some basic functions and functionality. Be really honest with me really quick. How many of you, when you open an Excel spreadsheet, are like absolutely terrified of what you're going to find and what you have to do with it? It's okay. It's totally honest. I've been in that boat. Probably the month before fellowship, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing with Excel, and this is going to be terrifying. How many of you feel like, okay, I can download an Excel spreadsheet, I can kind of feel my way around, I can figure it out, I can use Google, all those things? Raise your hand. Awesome. And how many of you feel like, I've got Excel, I can figure it out, I'm an expert, I know what I'm doing? Awesome, cool. So those of you, Tom raising his hand in the back. Tom, I'm not talking to you. So those of you that really know what you're doing, definitely feel free to raise your hand in the middle and say, I know a better way to do this, or I know of a more efficient way to do this, or you could also do it this way. How many of you use Epic? You know there's a million ways to get to information using your electronic health record, or not even Epic, Cerner, other types of electronic medical records. But there's many ways that you can get to using information in Excel. And the way that I present is just one way of many. So that being said, I'm going to be using Excel 2016, a part of the PC Microsoft Suite. That being said, what you'll see might look different from what you all have on your Excel versions at home, especially if you're using a Mac. How many people are using Mac? It's okay. I'm a proud Mac user at home, and then I have to be a PC user here at KP. So things might look a little different. I'm not as able, as I'm presenting, to point out the differences between Apple and PC as far as Excel goes. I can, if you raise your hand afterward and ask me a question, I can try to figure it out with you all. It's definitely something I can do. I also have, who looked at the pre-session information prior to today's session? It's okay if you didn't. Okay, I would say the majority of the 8.7% of you did not. That's totally fine. But I also have some version like how-to guides up there. So if that's helpful, then definitely take a peek at that. But we'll be going through a lot of different ways to manipulate Excel. Okay, so who is using Excel for their research projects? Okay, fantastic. Who is not using Excel for their research projects to either collect data or do data analysis? Okay, what are you using?
REDCap.
What?
REDCap.
REDCap. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about REDCap. Who's aware of what REDCap is? Cool. So a good majority of us. That's awesome. Well, we'll just kind of dive right on into things. So like I said, we'll be talking about data collection tools and a lot of techniques using Microsoft Excel. Just as an outline for today, this stuff is really hard to present in a active learning environment where I have all of you sitting here staring at a screen and I'm trying to manipulate an Excel spreadsheet in front of you. So you all have a PowerPoint that we have posted online, and then you all should see online that there is a sample spreadsheet that we're going to be using today as an example to work through some Excel functions and manipulations. What I recommend that you do is just listen to me and watch me as I go through those manipulations. This session's being recorded, and so if there was something that you want to go back and look at later, do on your own, we'll post the recording and send it out so you guys can go back and look at that. Because if you're trying to also perform the functions while I'm doing it, and your version may be different than mine, or your system might be slower, or my system might be slower, things get a little janky is my easiest, most professional way to say that. Does that make sense? Anyone have an issue with that? You're definitely welcome if you feel more fast-paced to do it on your own as I'm doing it. I just find it's a lot easier if you watch me do it, and then we can go through issues later. Okay. So this session, like I told you guys last time, used to be a part of the data analysis and statistical analysis section that we had last time. And the person who used to present this had a section on how to perform some basic statistical tests using Microsoft Excel. I no longer put that in this session. I have it separated in a separate slide deck that should also be posted for you. Do you guys see that on the Aspire website? Okay. It also requires that you download a data analysis tool pack using Microsoft Excel. So I recommend that you do that, especially if you're doing the analysis and someone else isn't doing it for you. And I can help you all with that afterward. We're just not going to go through it today in class, if that makes sense. Okay. Alrighty, so some data collection tools. There's a ton of different ways that you can collect data. Some systems and some programs who do research utilize REDCap. REDCap is a HIPAA-compliant centralized database that has online and offline data capture capabilities. You can set up surveys, you can set up different questionnaires and instruments, and it's really easy to use, especially if you have multiple people who are performing data collection. Everything is standardized in there for you. It allows for some branching logic, so if someone says, yes, they have COPD, it can then pop up another question that says, what grade is COPD? So that's really helpful when you're entering data. It can also do some basic calculations, and you can export the data into other types of statistical packages if you're going to be using another statistical package like SAS or Stata, SPSS, something like that. So I really like REDCap. Unfortunately, some programs give it to you for free if you're a resident, like I know CU allows their residents to use REDCap or their fellows. But other programs make you pay for it or build it into, for example, if you're getting a grant and writing a grant proposal, you can build in some money to be able to pay for REDCap as well, which I've seen some grants do here at Kaiser. Who has experience with REDCap? What do you like about it, of those of you that raised your hand? Anything? Yep, you can build the surveys right in, super easy. Anything else? Yeah, so, yes. Okay, so Deanne has used it for a clinical trial and doing data collection for a clinical trial. The biggest pro of using REDCap is it's super user-friendly, and there's a lot of good feedback from those who are the end users of this product. Like I said, the big drawback is you do have to pay for it. Of those of you who have used REDCap, anything you didn't like about it in particular? Yeah, if you're the person building the collection tools, it's certainly a little clunky, takes some work to finesse. You definitely have to go in there and play with it a lot in order to get it right and maybe go through some end user testing to make sure the data collection tool tests okay, for sure. Anything else? Okay, so I'm a REDCap fan, but because most of us have the Microsoft Office suite, we like to use Excel for a lot of our data collection. And as we all know, those are based on spreadsheets in Excel. When you're building data collection tools using Excel, it's important to keep in mind what you're going to be doing with the data after you have entered it in order to design it appropriately. So I know that you all may not be doing your own statistical analyses, but if you want to do a fellowship, you certainly, if you're interested in that, we do a lot of this as fellows. Entering your data in very specific ways in the spreadsheet is important to being able to analyze your data. So if we can enter things using just dichotomous 0 and 1 variables, that makes it much easier to do data analysis in Excel versus if one cell can have 5 different variables. That makes things pretty complex. Other things on this slide are important to consider. Like I said, if you're doing something where you're using a dichotomous yes-no type of answer or 0-1, you can also build in a data dictionary in another spreadsheet where you can say, okay, in this cell, a value should be 0 or 1, where 0 means this and 1 means this. And that helps, especially if you have multiple people who are participating in the data collection, just to keep things standardized. And we'll go through another way to keep things standardized in Excel as well if you have multiple people doing data collection on the same spreadsheet. Another thing to consider is that within one cell in Excel, it's important that you should only have one data point within that cell. So for the previous example of COPD, in one cell you should have COPD yes, no, and you would enter yes and no. You don't want to have a semicolon in the same cell and then grade 4 if they're yes, because that makes it really hard to do data analysis. We want to be able to make this as clean and simple as possible. That being said, there are some things we're not going to cover today in class. So one of those is how to code using Excel VBA, which is Virtual Basic for Applications. That's the coding language in Excel. If you want to do some more advanced statistical analyses or types of coding, you will need to learn how to use VBA or creating macros. We're not going to cover that today in Excel. There's a lot of functions in Excel, a ton, and we're just going to barely scratch the surface of how many functions there are. If you're interested in looking into more of the functions that are available, I have some resources that I can give you all. And we're not going to cover in creating and formatting graphs, although as I'm sure many of you have experienced, doing this and being able to do this in Excel can be really helpful, especially if you're, for example, trying to build a presentation on your research project and you want to be able to just show some information in a graph or a bar chart, something like that. So that would be important for you all to play around with. And a lot of Excel truly is playing around with it and trying to feel your way around and see what gives you the information that you need. So because we can't cover anything, I told you about the links online we have posted on the Aspire website. I have Dr. Google here as a somewhat facetious resource for you all, but I can say after talking to many Excel experts, when they don't know an answer to something, they Google it. If you've had a problem in Excel, someone online has also had the same problem. Will you maybe be able to understand the answer that they have posted online? Maybe, maybe not. But a lot of it is truly turning to your resources, which often is Google. They have separate books on Excel as well. Udemy offers a $12.99 online course. I actually kind of like this course. I took it because I wanted to see what it was like, and it is actually a course geared towards healthcare professionals. So if you see yourself in a management role later after residency or something like that, or something that involves a lot of data, definitely look to some other resources to be able to utilize Excel appropriately. Microsoft also has the Excel Training Center online through their website, and if you all click on these links, you should be able to go to those sources. And finally, the spreadsheet page is actually built by someone who's widely known as an Excel guru. They have a lot of free resources on there, downloadable templates, videos, lots of tutorials, and a ton of information that I found super helpful. So, has anyone else ever found any good resources if they have questions with Excel? Anything? Okay. Yeah, these tend to be kind of helpful. But the reason I bring this up is it's better to look for the correct answer somewhere else and ask questions about how to do something correctly than do something incorrectly. And this slide really goes to show you the impact of the research that you all are producing even as residents. So there was this study that was done, I forget way back when, I think it was 2016 that this was posted, but they looked at a sample of genomics papers that are available on PubMed, and they looked through the data pack that the authors had uploaded as a part of their journal submission, and they went through their Excel documents and looked for errors in the data. And they found that, for example, in the Nature journal, which is a very, very prestigious, highly regarded journal, up to 30% of the papers had spreadsheet errors. That's a big deal. Can you imagine if 30% of the information you looked at on PubMed was incorrect? That's a lot. And so I just bring this up to show you guys that the research that you do is important and impactful, and you should be taking that seriously, especially with data analysis and the way that you enter data. Any questions about that? Okay. So now what I'm going to do is actually switch from the PowerPoint to Excel, and I'm going to walk through a ton of manipulations within Excel. Firstly, I'll go through some tips and tricks. Excel does not always treat blank values or blank cells as a zero value. So that's important if you're trying to perform functions or trying to add things up within Excel or do an average. You may need to actually tell Excel and put a zero in a cell if you want it to calculate correctly. Excel actually treats blank cells truly as the absence of any value, not zero. And that's its default. If you are trying to perform a function in Excel and you are wanting to refer to a blank cell, within the function you need to use these double quotations as indicating a blank cell. And we'll go through, actually I'm not sure if we'll go through an example of this, but if you have more questions about this, I can definitely answer them for you. If you are building an Excel formula that is referring to a cell that is talking about a word and not using a number, you need to put that word in quotation marks. Excel can't read your mind. It needs to know exactly what you want. So that's important, especially when you're collecting data, that you're trying to put everything in the Excel spreadsheet the most standardized way possible. If you tell Excel to look for female, all in quotes, with the lowercase f, it may not find female with an uppercase F because you didn't tell it to look for that. So while we think computers are smart, they definitely cannot read our minds. We'll talk about this last bullet point a little more in an example, but typically when you copy a formula in Excel and paste it to another cell in Excel, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. Excel is going to change the reference cell or the original cell that you were trying to calculate the formula based upon. And that can create a lot of issues if you're trying to calculate things or perform formulas. And we'll go through an example on that too. Okay. Any questions about this so far? Okay. Hopefully this is somewhat helpful to you all. That's certainly the goal. So this is the example spreadsheet that we have posted on the Aspire website. I'm sorry if it's a little small. I'll try to make it as big as possible. Definitely cutting off a little bit at the edges. Oh, Lord. Okay. Sorry, you all. I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for you guys. Okay. This is the example spreadsheet. This is just a spreadsheet with some fake data that we made up for the purpose of doing this class with you all. Assume that there's a study where we're looking at patients with COPD. We're looking to see if they have heart failure and if they had an ejection fraction, whether they were admitted to the hospital, whether they were on a beta blocker or not. We're trying to collect all this data about these patients and do some sort of analysis for our study. So the first thing we'll talk about is using the data fill handle. And a good example to see this done is if you enter the number 4 in this cell here in G2. If I have my cell highlighted and I hover over the bottom right corner, you can see a little black plus. I'll do it again. A little black plus form. If I were to click that and drag down, you can see that Excel will copy that number down. The data fill handle is also really helpful for if you're trying to create patterns of data. So for example, if I was trying to have this count sequentially from 4 through 10, I would just have to enter the first couple numbers, 4 and 5, highlight those, and then drag the data fill down. And it will automatically count up for you. So data fill handle is pretty useful. Data fill can also be used for non-number information. So if you wanted to say Monday, Tuesday, it's going to automatically fill in when we highlight these and drag them down, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It will also count if you need to have it count up by specific numbers, like if we had 30, 60, 90 entered in here, it will automatically count up by 30 if you do that as well. So data fill can be super helpful, especially if you're copying lots of data. I feel like you all are looking at me like you already know this, so I'm going to move on. Definitely raise your hand if you have any questions about any of this information. As you all may or may not be aware, you can definitely select an entire column by hovering over the column number and clicking, and it will select the whole column. You can do that with rows by hovering over the row number and clicking as well. It will select the entire row. And then you can select the entire spreadsheet by clicking this little box between A and 1, and it will select your entire spreadsheet. That can be helpful if you're trying to copy information from one section to another. So let's say, for example, we wanted to copy just these first few columns and first few rows. And I do Control-C for copy. I'm just going to enter a new spreadsheet in at the bottom here using this plus sign. And if I press Control-V, there's this little dialog box at the bottom that says Paste Options. If you, for example, had a whole bunch of formulations and functions in the previous spreadsheet that you were trying to copy, you would want to select this and use this value down here to retain all of the source functions and everything like that. If you don't use this specific paste special, then your Excel document is going to change the source functions and source cells that it's calculating formulas based upon. So that's just important for you to know from a management standpoint if you're trying to copy information from one spreadsheet into another. But I don't have any formulas in this selection, so it's a bad example, but definitely let me know if you have questions about that too. Okay. Any questions thus far? All righty. So how many of you know how to freeze panes? Yay, freezing panes is super helpful, especially if you have a really big data collection sheet. So for example, right now, if I'm scrolling down in my data collection sheet, I lose that top row completely. It's just stuck up there, and I may forget, like, okay, what was this supposed to be and what was that supposed to be? So it's good to be able to freeze this top row so that when you scroll, it doesn't go away. So in order to do that, you would go to the View tab up here at the top, and you would click on Freeze Panes, Freeze Top Row, and now when you scroll, it's going to stay there no matter what you do. That can be pretty helpful. I'm going to unfreeze that really quick so I can show you other things. You can freeze the first column as well. So as you scroll right to left, that first column stays there, which can be pretty helpful. If you wanted to, for example, freeze the top row and the first column, you would need to do a little bit different of a function. So imagine if we're freezing this top row and we're freezing this first column, I would want to select the top left corner of the data that's going to move. So we want this top row frozen and this first column frozen. So the top left corner is going to be B2 that's moving. So if I would select that, and then I would go up to Freeze Panes, and I would click Freeze Panes. And now as I scroll down, that top row doesn't move, and as I scroll right, that column doesn't move. So that can be really helpful, especially I know a lot of you are doing some chart review and doing manual data collection, and you can definitely get lost in the spreadsheet if you don't have a functionality like this. So anyway. Another thing that, bless you, another thing that can be helpful is sometimes as you're doing manual data collection, let's say we're reviewing the chart for this third patient here, and you're like, I'm not really sure what's going on with this patient. I might want to check with my preceptor. I have a question about what's going on with this case. Perhaps you want to highlight this one to remind yourself to go back, or you may have different colors that correspond to different things. In order to do that, you would select the entire row, go to your Home tab at the top. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of something else. Go ahead instead of just select this row and right-click and click on Format Cells right here. A little dialog box will open, and it'll give you a ton of different ways to display the data. What we're interested in is highlighting the cell a specific color or filling it in. So you would click on the Fill tab at the top, and you would click on whatever color you want to fill this in. Let's just do yellow for now. You can also do specific patterns, like if you went crazy and you were trying to do stripes or dots or something like that. The important thing to know about this is that Excel cannot perform any functions based off of colors that you put in. It can't tell you, okay, here's all the yellow highlighted rows for you. So definitely do this with caution, knowing that it can't do a lot with the information that you're giving it. Deanna?
It'll actually sort by color.
It can sort by color, so yes, it can for sure. Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. So if we click OK from that, then we have this row highlighted in yellow. I don't know if y'all have been looking at this as in-depth as maybe I have, but you'll notice that column F here, discharge date, these are not actual dates. Sometimes when you download Excel spreadsheets from other sources like Epic or something like that, it pops out an Excel sheet in formats that look really weird. So you may want to change this into a date format. This is just a specific way that Excel has dates coded in the background that you're not able to see. So in order to do that, you would highlight this column, column F. You could right-click and go to Format Cells again, This time we're interested in that first column, or that first tab here that says number, and it's asking us, okay, how do you want me to tell you the number? So we would go down to date, and it gives us a ton of different date options that we have here. We could have it tell us the entire, March 14th, 2012. We could have it tell us the time. We could have it just tell us the month and date, or month and year, month and day. So lots of different ways to be able to display your data. I'm just going to select this one for funsies, and you can see that it changes the dates to month, day, day, year, 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 year.
It has the full date in there, but say you chose you want just a month and year.
Mm-hmm.
Will it do that and get rid of the date?
I believe it will. So let me go back into format cells. So Deanna's question is, okay, we have it formatted this way. Could it just do the month and the year, you're saying? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely can. So a lot of this is just scrolling through our potential options. So this has March-12, so it has the month written out, and then it has 12, so the last two numbers of the year. It will also do the month/day. I forget where the month/year is. It might have been further down. I'm not sure where that is. It might just be this one is the only option they have for that. Yeah, that's a good question. So if we do that, then it changes everything. Yeah, sure. So that's how you change dates in Excel. Sometimes things pop up weird too when you're doing currency in Excel. Yeah, so I would just recommend playing around with that if you want it to view a certain way. So a good example of that is this ID column. We have all these IDs in random digits. So this first one has only one digit to represent the ID number. The second one has 3 digits. This fifth one has 2 digits. Maybe you want all of the ID numbers to display with 3 digits, where, for example, it would say 001 instead of just 1. So you can do that too in Excel if you highlight this column and right-click on Format Cells. And if you go to if you go to Custom at the bottom, there's all these different options you can pick from, and they all can be very confusing. I just tend to pick one and then type in and tell it what I want. So what this is trying to do in Excel is say anywhere there is a number, display that number, and if not, display a 0. I just type, in order to do this, you would delete the last 3 and type in 000. And Excel will add zeros where there are not currently zeros in the number. So that can be somewhat helpful for some people. Okay. I'm going to undo that for now. All right. Another thing that you can do is have Excel tell you, well, I'm not sure we'll go through that in a minute. The way that data is displayed in Excel on your Excel spreadsheet can be really helpful for when you're trying to share the data between multiple people or share the spreadsheet between multiple people. So this is really easily readable like this. Sometimes you may want, if you're trying to fit a lot of information into one spreadsheet, you may want these columns to be a lot tighter, and you can see how messy that makes this column look here, or this I1 cell look here. Another thing you can do to fix that is completely switch the vertical alignment of the text. So a good example of that is actually over here with P, Q, and R. So we have heart rate as displayed horizontally like this, but maybe we also want systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure displayed like this. In order to do that, we would just highlight those two columns, two cells, right-click, go to Format Cells, and then click the Alignment tab, and type in 90 degrees here on the side under Orientation. We'll click OK. And then it will flip things the other way. And that way you can make these a lot smaller and try to fit more information into the spreadsheet. I don't know. Anyway. I'm actually going to make this third column not highlighted because it's looking pretty ugly right now. So I just unhighlighted that column. The other thing you can do is if you have your Excel spreadsheet set up and it looks really nice and pretty and you're ready to copy it into other media like a PowerPoint document or a Word document, you could actually format your Excel spreadsheet as a table. So if you have, I believe you have to select the entire spreadsheet. So go ahead and click this upper corner here between A and 1. And then you can click Format as Table at the top. And then you get to pick what your table looks like. And go ahead and click. It's going to ask you where is the data for your table. If you only wanted a piece of this to look like a table, you could tell Excel to do that. It is important for you to tell Excel that your table has headers, and that is just essentially the title for each column at the top here. If you don't tell Excel that, sometimes it will add headers for you, like header 1, header 2, header 3, and that's really unhelpful for us as researchers. So I almost always click this box that says my table has headers. Once you do that, you see that Excel has now made this a table for you. Oops. Sorry, I'm undoing what I just did. The nice thing about making it as a table, and you can actually do this in other ways in Excel too, you see these little arrows next to each header at the top? That allows you to filter things. So for example, if I only wanted to look at the male patients in this data, I could click the little arrow next to gender, and at the bottom, I would unselect all, and I would just click male, and OK, and it would only show me all the male patients in the data. You could also have it group the IDs from lowest to highest if you were really interested in doing that by clicking the arrow, and then, ooh, you guys can't see that. Hold on. Pause, please. Clicking the arrow, and then sort smallest to largest, or largest to smallest will reorganize the data for you too. So it's kind of nice. I don't really recommend that you do this a ton unless you're ready and fully ready to copy the data into another, like Microsoft Word or presentation or something like that. I don't use this a ton. I'm going to undo everything I just did. Another way that, oh, go ahead, Nancy, thanks. You can, and thanks for leading into that. I was just going to say that. If you're interested in doing all that data filtering and sorting without formatting it as a table, you would go to the Data tab at the top, and then your Sort and Filter options are right here under Sort and Filter, obviously. So if you click Filter, it automatically adds all those arrows right next to your headers, and you could do all the exact same thing as before. The important thing to know about filtering is it does not remove the data from the spreadsheet. So the data will still be there in the background, and that's when copy-paste special becomes really important. So if I was only looking at our male patients, for example, and I was trying to like copy these patients over to a new table, I would have to use a very specific paste function in order for it to not paste the data so that you can see all the hidden background data. So I really like Filter. Filter has saved my life many times. I actually exclusively use Filter in my PGY1 project because I had to use Epic Reporting Workbench to get all of my data. So anyway, I've used Filter a ton. All right, any questions thus far? Thank you for bringing that up, Nancy. Okay. You might also be interested in looking visually for a specific piece of information in your spreadsheet. So for example, if I only wanted to look at this metoprolol equivalent discharge cell or column here on the right, and I wanted to see how many patients were discharged on a metoprolol equivalent dose of 100 or more, for example. I could have Excel highlight all of those cells for me. I would just need to click on the column at the top, go to the Home tab, and click on Conditional Formatting, and we will create a new rule. In order to do this, you would click the second option. You see there's so many options to do conditional formatting. I don't really recommend using conditional formatting unless you're trying to visually show some information because, again, Excel cannot do any formulas or functions based off of conditional formatting. So for this example, we'll click on this second row here. And we're telling Excel to only highlight cells that contain a specific value of greater than 100. So we want cell value. I'm going to click the little arrow next to between, and I want greater than. I could also click greater than equal to if I want, but I'm just going to do greater than for now. And I'm going to type in 100. This would be a place, if you're trying to refer to text information like F for female or something like that, you would need to use quotation marks to tell Excel that you're referring to text and not to number. So I'm just going to have 100 here, and then I need to tell Excel, okay, how do you want me to highlight this? So I'll click this format box here and fill, and let's just have it highlighted in green, for example. Again, you could pick all sorts of crazy patterns if you want. And click OK. Click OK again. And it is telling me all of the cells as I scroll down that are greater than 100. So it's just good for some visual, not analysis, but visual inspection of the data. Okay. Any questions? All right. So how many of you are doing data collection with another person? Okay, so we have some people. Are you worried about the two of you doing it differently? Yes, I would definitely be too. I've done data collection with another fellow here last year, and we did find we were collecting data a little differently and had to reestablish some rules and boundaries. One way that you can do that in Excel to make sure that you guys are entering the correct data in each cell is by using something called data validation. So for this example, let's say we also wanted to collect information about smoking on these patients. I'm just going to insert a column by right-clicking on a column and clicking Insert. And it's just going to make a brand new column for me. And I'm going to title this column Smoking Status. And let's say I only want values of current, past, or never to be in these columns. I don't want half pack a day. I don't want light smoker. I don't want 10 cigarettes a day, which is also half pack a day. I want nothing extraneous like that. I just want current, past, or never. 3 options. You would definitely use data validation for this. Go up to the top to data at the tab at the top. Click on this data validation button here. And here I'm telling Excel, right now it's saying, I allow any value. You can put anything in this cell and I will think it's okay. And that's not what I want. So I'm going to click the arrow right here and click on List. And Excel will say, okay, so tell me the list of things that you want. So I'm going to type in this source dialog box here, current, comma, past, comma, never, and click OK. And now you see there's a little arrow next to this cell, and it only lets me put in current, past, or never. And you would click one of those options. This is kind of hard to use if you're trying to quickly enter data because you can't easily get into this cell if you're just tabbing and using your keyboard. You'd have to use your mouse to get to this, or I believe you can also click F2. I'm going to try it now. No, F2 doesn't let you do that. But let's say I tried to enter super for super smoker. I don't know. And if I clicked enter, Excel would tell me this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. And it would say, no, you cannot do that. Go back. Do not go through jail or do not pass go or whatever Monopoly says. So you can also customize these messages, and I have examples of that in the PowerPoint. You can have this message say, please enter a value of current, past, or never. You can also make it so that whenever the person has this cell selected, a little dialog box will pop up in the corner that says this cell needs to have values of current, past, or never. And that way the person doesn't need to make a mistake in order to find out what you want in that cell. And you would do that by going up to data validation again and clicking input message here, and you would say a title could be correct values. Enter current, past, or never. And click OK. And now when I have that cell selected, it tells me, okay, the correct values for this cell are current, past, or never. Is that semi-helpful? Okay, I'm seeing some nods, so yay. That's good. Okay. I find data validation particularly useful if I'm collecting a lot of data and I'm doing a lot of manual chart review, or if I'm doing chart review with someone else and I want to make sure we're being consistent. So, yeah. You can also require certain cells to only contain numbers, for example. So, for example, if I scroll to the right, this systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure, currently you can put anything you want in these cells. So if I wanted to change this first one, I could change it to low. That's not super helpful for us as researchers. We want to know how low a systolic blood pressure is. So you could select that and go to data validation, settings, and it would ask you to allow any value. You could tell it, I want a whole number, I want a decimal, I want a date, a time, a text length, like this has to be 3 characters long. You could tell it exactly what you want. So I'm going to undo that really quick. Any questions on data validation at all? Okay. We're going to move into more of some formulas and functions. How many of you feel that you can do addition and subtraction and average pretty easily in Excel? Okay. Then we'll just go through this on a really basic level. What I'm going to do is I'm going to perform all of my calculations at the bottom of a column. And the reason I do that is because sometimes if you're doing a lot of calculating or you're trying to do way too much at once, you may scroll off to the side and say, okay, I'm trying to add these 2 cells together, and it just gets way too messy too quick. It's important, like I said, to start with the end in mind. Where are you going to be doing your data analysis? How do you want this spreadsheet set up? Just be as clean and simple as possible. So I'm going to calculate the average and the minimum and the maximum age. So that's this column here, column D. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. There's a lot of data in this. And in this column, in this cell, I'm going to calculate the average age. In order to access formulas, if you don't feel comfortable just typing in equals, average, and then, freehanding it yourself, go ahead and go to the Formulas tab at the top and click Insert Function. And Excel will give you the gamut of the functions it has available. There's a ton of these, way too much for us to go through today. But we could select a function that's most recently used. We could look at all of the different functions it has available. In this cell, like I said, I want to do average, so I'm going to click on average here and click OK. So this box pops up. It's asking me where is the data that you want to calculate an average based off of. And the way that Excel has this numbered, I know it's really hard to see in the back, is it's the cell value that you want to start with. So we're starting at the very top of the column, which is D2. That's the name of that cell. We want to go all the way through the bottom of that column, which is actually D224. And if you want to tell Excel, I want this range of values between these 2 cells, you just put a colon in between them. So I'm saying I want to reference D2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through 224. So interestingly, Excel will pop up like a preview of what's currently available in those cells, and then at the bottom left, it'll tell you this is what I'm anticipating the formula result to be. So before you even click OK, you can see if there might be an issue with the way that you're telling Excel to program this formula or function. So if, for example, this said formula results 327, that would feel wrong, right? We wouldn't have an average age of 327. I would know that I'm telling it the wrong information. So go ahead and click OK here. And at the bottom, it has 69 as the average age. You can see in this navigation box at the top that I'm telling Excel to calculate an average of the cells D2 through D224. This is kind of helpful because sometimes, like I said, if you're not doing your Excel spreadsheet in a very organized fashion, you may click on a cell and not realize that there's a formula already in that. And so if you click on something and see that a formula pops up in this box up here, it's helpful for you to see. So you would do the minimum the exact same way. We would click the cell right below it, go to Insert Function, click Min. You can also search for functions using the search box here at the top. So you could type min or minimum and click Go. If you don't see it pop up, you might have to change this to all right here. But I'm going to click minimum. Okay, it's asking me the same question, but Excel is kind of confused because I was just in cell D226. So it's saying, oh, you want the minimum of the cell you were just in? And I don't. So I'm going to have to tell Excel, I want cells D2 colon D224. And if you don't know that right off the bat, you can also click on this little arrow next to this button, and it kind of makes the dialog box smaller, and you can scroll through your Excel spreadsheet and tell Excel exactly which cells you want it to calculate the information based off of. So all I'm doing is clicking and dragging all the way down to cell D224. And I'm going to click the little arrow next to here again and click OK. Oh, it's mad at me. So if it gets mad at you, I don't know if you all can see that, it says hashtag value or pound value. If you go up to the top, it's saying, okay, you want the minimum of D224 plus the minimum of D224. So it's getting really confused. I told it too many arguments. So I'm just going to delete the last piece of that and click Enter. And the minimum value is 42. And then you would calculate maximum the same way. Any questions on that? I know it's pretty basic. Okay. Maybe something I can teach you all, hopefully, if you're not aware of this. How many of you had been scrolling through Excel before and trying to count people and criteria, or people that meet your specific criteria with your hand, like as you're counting and scrolling? I've definitely done that. Deanna's raising her hand. Cool. Sweet. So I am going to teach you something semi-cool, hopefully. So let's say, for example, we want to count how many females are in this specific data set. I'm going to go to the bottom of the gender column here, which is column C, and I would use a specific function called COUNTIF. You can also count using multiple criteria, which is something we're going to do next, but we're just going to do COUNTIF for now and click on Insert Function, which again is under this Formulas Data tab. And I'm going to select COUNTIF. If you don't see it, then go ahead and search for it up here and click OK. So now Excel is saying, okay, where do you want me to count things? And it's the exact same thing as before. We want C2. Remember, we're saying C because we're in the gender column. C2 through C224. And how do we have female denoted in this data set? As an F. So what do I need to do? Yay, add the quotes. Yay. So I'm going to add open quote F in capitalized close quote and click OK. And as you can see, Excel is already telling me a result, which is awesome, meaning I'm not doing something super wrong with my formula. And it tells me, okay, there's 68 females in your data. That can be helpful for your table 1. I'll show you another way to do that later. I'm going to delete this for now. Let's say we wanted to know how many females were in our population who are also 80 years or older. So we're really looking at that high-risk population or something like that. You would now need to use COUNTIF with an S at the end because you're trying to use multiple criteria to count something. So you would click Insert Function at the top, select COUNTIF, plural, and click OK. So the exact same thing as before. It's asking you, where do you want me to calculate things the first? So same thing. We are going to look in cells C2 through C224, and we want to find an F, right? And you notice that as I clicked down here, it's saying, okay, you've given me some sort of criteria for one piece of what we're looking for. Where else do you want to look for information? And we have age in our D column, right? So we would want to look at D2 through D224. And we're looking for what age? 80 or older? So you would need to tell Excel, just like you've learned in math class before when you were in elementary school, we want the greater than or equal to 80. And as you can see, Excel will pop up a ton of these. Like I could enter in apparently 25 criteria or more. So you can do lots of count ifs. We're just going to leave this okay for now. And then once we click OK, there's only 9 patients who are female and aged 80 or older. Hopefully that saves you some time and maybe an error if you're scrolling through data and trying to manually count. Not as helpful. Did everyone know that? I thought it was cool when I learned that. Okay. That's good. Okay. So we talked about count if. We're going to talk about if statements now. If statements are a little complex, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint just to explain a concept of if statements really quick. And this is actually, if statements are where you need to know a little bit about Excel coding language. I'm going to make this bigger. Yay, okay. If statements. So the goal of using if statements is to group your data into categories of people. So you would create a new column maybe in your spreadsheet and you would say if female equals 1 or if age greater than 60 equals 1 or something like that. So you're making one a category of a specific type of patient. Does that make sense? Okay. So the way that Excel puts the if statement and the if formula in is this little equal sign, if, and then a parentheses, and then there's 3 components that are separated by commas with an end parentheses. The first component is the statement that you're trying to evaluate. What are you asking Excel to look at? So if you were to say it out loud, what's the exact piece of your statement that comes right after if? If age greater than 65, for example. That's what we'll need to put in this first component of the if statement. The second component of the if statement is you telling Excel what value should go in that cell if this first component of the if statement is true. So if age greater than 65, put a 1 in that column. The third component of the if statement is the value that you should put in the cell if that is not true, if that first component is not true. So if age greater than 65 is not true, then put a 0 in this cell. It's crucial you guys understand that for this next demonstration because it can get really confusing. Does that make sense? Okay. Has anyone seen the movie Inception? Okay. So if statements are kind of like the movie Inception, where it's a dream inside a dream inside a dream. You can build if statements inside if statements inside if statements that just go round and round and round. And where you would do that if you needed to build multiple if statements within each other is through this third component here. An example of that is in the PowerPoint that I have already posted for you guys. I'm not going to use that example in front of you because it can get pretty confusing to explain, but let me know if you have questions about it. I think the PowerPoint goes through it relatively simply, but I'll just show you an example of if statements. So I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the top. I thought I saw a hand. Okay. So I'm going to do the example that I just told you guys. So if age greater than 65, whatever. Whoops. Can you guys see that? Ha ha ha. No one thinks I'm funny today. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to tell Excel if age greater than 65, put a 1 in a column. So I'm going to create a new column next to age. So I'm going to right-click on E, insert. I'll just title this age greater than 65, question mark. So maybe using data validation, if you had multiple people working on this project together and on the spreadsheet, you could have data validation only accept values of 0 or 1 here, or you could just have Excel calculate it and you won't have to go through and do that yourself because that's a lot of work and you guys are busy and you don't have time for that. So that's what we're going to have Excel do. So I'm going to use the formula builder, insert function, and click on if. Again, if you don't see it in this list, go ahead and search for it up here. And these are the three components that we just went through in the PowerPoint slide. So the logical test, if age greater than 65. Well, what Excel is wondering in this first text box here is what value do you want me to be referring to? Well, for this specific cell, we want Excel to look to the cell next to it to find the age greater than 65. So I'm going to click on C2, and you can see that up here, or I'm sorry, D2. Excel already entered D2, and I'm going to say, using my little caret on my keyboard, greater than 65. So I'm telling Excel, if the cell next to you is greater than 65, what do I want the cell to put in? What do I want Excel to say? 1. Okay, so I'm going to put 1 here. And I'm going to put 0 here, because if this cell is not greater than 65, then I want it to put a 0. If you want Excel to leave it blank, this is the place where you would use the double quotation marks to leave it blank. And again, Excel is already telling you a formula result. We can see right here this age is greater than 80, so it should give me back a 1. We're going to say OK. And I'm going to show you how, or an example of Excel changing the reference cells for a formula. So if I use the data fill handle and I drag down here, you can see that in E3, the age is greater than 65 next to it, so it put a 1 here. In E4, the age is not greater than 65, so if it left it blank like I told it to. We could have it do 0 if we wanted, but I just left it blank just to show you all. If I look at the top, this if statement is telling me, maybe if I click on it, I don't know. This if statement is saying if D4 is greater than 65, put a 1, and if not, leave it blank. So Excel automatically, as I was dragging down using the data fill handle, changed the cell that I was originally referring to. And that can be super helpful if you're trying to copy a formula like this. If you don't want Excel to do that, then you need to put a $sign in between the letter and the number of the cell that you're referring to. So I'm going to put a $sign here between D and 4 and click Enter. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. So now if I drag this down, oops, it should have left it blank. Oh gosh. Inconsistent formula. Oh, I think it's mad because it sees that the cells before it have a different formula and that I changed it spontaneously. I can do, but it should leave it blank because it was referring to D4 in all the cells below it. Does that make sense? If you're not wanting Excel to automatically change the cell you're referring to, then you have to put a $sign between the number and the letter. Okay. I'm just trying to save you a ton of Googling later in life. You might need the $sign in front of the D2, as Nancy's telling me. So Nancy's the expert. You will direct all your questions to her. I'm just kidding, Nancy. I like that. We'll post Nancy's email so you can send her questions. She's my resident for my resident project, so I can pick on her. Let's add $. I think it has to be before and after, right? Before the D. Before the D. Okay. Ah, I love it. Okay, so you have to put it before and after the number and letter. So now you can see that this cell should be blank, right, per our other formula that we had, because this age is less than 65. So it should be blank per the previous if statement we had. But now we're telling Excel at the top, oh, you're referring to cell D2 still, so that's way up here, and this age is greater than 80, so I'm going to leave it as a 1. Does that make sense? Okay. If it doesn't. Go ahead.
What I might add too is that with the example of you can leave it blank or put in a zero, I recommend using the zero, because if you have a blank cell, there's always, for me anyway, if I don't, did I miss something? Did we not calculate right? Did we not enter a data point in? So I recommend not just having blank cells, to go in and enter zero, or you can have a dash, or whatever you decide you want there, but, just leaving it blank is sometimes leaves extra work later.
It could mean, yeah, for those who are calling in or for the recording, Deanna recommends that definitely use zero when you mean zero or you're trying to categorize people into specific categories. Sometimes a blank cell can definitely mean, you know, you're missing data or you're unsure about that data value or something like that. Yeah, I definitely echo that.
Yeah, even if you use the drop down, when you select something, you could put none in there. And so that you don't have a blank cell. So you don't have to go back and say, did I check it? Was it fewer, more, less?
Yes.
It was none. So.
Agreed. Use none and use zero. Very rarely use blank. Okay. Alrighty. So, who has ever needed to use something called VLOOKUP? I've needed to use VLOOKUP. Someone's raising their hand. Yay! So VLOOKUP is a function or a formula that you would use if you needed to combine information from multiple spreadsheets into one spreadsheet. And so in order to do that, you would need to tell Excel, well, there's a common information between these two spreadsheets, use that common denominator to link up information about the patient into one spreadsheet. We're going to do that now. I'm not super proficient at VLOOKUP, so this might cause an error, but that's okay. We can work through it together, and Nancy can tell me where to add dollar signs. Nancy, you know I love you. It's okay. Okay. So I have information in this sheet 1 at the bottom. If you click on that, oh, it's super small. We'll zoom in really quick. There's some data information here that says follow-up ejection fraction actual. So maybe you were working on this with another student or another resident or another person, and they, instead of putting information in this first spreadsheet, entered it in the second spreadsheet, and you're like, what the heck? That's not where I wanted it. Why did you do that? Or maybe this was a follow-up, and you had all of the baseline information in this spreadsheet, and you were just collecting data in follow-up in this second spreadsheet. That definitely happens all the time, too. So maybe in this instance, we want to combine information from both spreadsheets so you have everything all in one place, and we're going to use that, or use VLOOKUP to do that. So go ahead and go back to the cohort page, spreadsheet. We have cell or column J here, which is baseline ejection fraction actual. The other one was follow-up ejection fraction actual. And I'm going to insert a new cell or a new column next to it so that we can have a whole bunch of information together. I did this earlier. I don't know why Excel does this. Sometimes when you insert columns, it will change the format of some of the cells next to it. So for example, as I'm highlighting K2 here at the top, it's telling me, well, you want me to put a date in here, and that's not what ejection fractions are. So I'm going to highlight K here, and I'm just going to tell it I only want numbers here, just to make sure there's going to be no errors as I'm doing the formula. All right, I want follow up. I'm just going to title this FU underscore EF underscore actual. Does anyone know why we use the underscores? It's actually not really for you all as the researcher and as the resident. I wish Tom was here. He could definitely speak to this. But when you're performing data analysis, it can be really hard to tell when there's spaces in data. So you would use the underscore to represent a space instead of actually having a space. Does that make sense? Okay. Your data analytics people will thank me later. Okay. So we're going to do VLOOKUP now. So I have a cell K2 highlighted. I'm going to go back up to formulas and insert function. Click on VLOOKUP. If you don't see it here, again, make sure you search for it up here. And it gives you a ton of value or a ton of text boxes, and it looks really confusing, and you're probably going to have to Google it, but that's okay. I'm going to tell you, and you're going to come back to the recording and listen to me. So all of these text boxes mean very specific things. This first text box that says lookup value, that is the specific cell that you want Excel to use to link the two spreadsheets together. So in this second spreadsheet, in this first spreadsheet we have ID, and in the second spreadsheet we also have ID. So that's the common linking agent between the two spreadsheets. So for K2, I'm going to click on A2 because I'm telling it, look at the value in A2 and try to find it in the second spreadsheet so that we can link them together. Does that make sense? Okay. This next text box that says table array, Excel is asking you here to tell it where to look for information. Are you looking in this second spreadsheet? Are you looking in a different spreadsheet? You have to tell Excel explicitly where the information is. It doesn't know. You have to tell it. So if you click into sheet 1, this is where all the information is. And we're just, like I said before, we're going to highlight all of this data because we want Excel to be able to link everything and to give me all the data that's in this sheet. So I just held my mouse down and then dragged down on all this data. Again, what we just learned before, Excel, when I go back to the other spreadsheet, is going to change the cells that I'm referring to, which I don't want it to do. So what do I need to do, Nancy? Dollar signs. Okay. So I put the dollar sign before the A and after the A, and I need to put the dollar sign before the B and after the B. So this next text box, it says column index number. Excel is asking you, okay, what information that is from the other sheet do you want to put in your first sheet? So the column that I'm interested in having inserted into my old spreadsheet is the second column. It's column number 2. So I'm going to put 2 in this text box. And then finally, this fourth text box is asking you, do you want an exact match? And I do want an exact match on the ID. I want it to be able to match correctly and exactly. So I'm just going to, in all caps, type in false here. You don't need to know why that's true or why it's false. Just remember, if you want an exact match, type in false here. And I'm so praying that this works so we don't have to actually troubleshoot it in front of you all. So I click OK. So it says pound or hashtag NA here. And that might seem confusing at first, but if I look at this ID number 1, and I look at the second spreadsheet, and I just kind of scroll through, there's no ID number 1 in here. So there's literally no information on ID 1 in the second spreadsheet in order for it to try to copy into the first. So it's actually okay that we got an error on this one.
Not an error.
Well, yeah, that we got an NA. I'm going to copy this down using the data fill handle. Whoop, way too far. But as I do that, you can see that a 30 was copied here for ID number 4. And if I go back to the other spreadsheet and I scroll up, there we go. ID number 4 has an ejection fraction of 30 at follow-up. Yay! Someone's clapping. I love it. Okay. Does that make sense? I know that Excel can seem really confusing, and you might be afraid when you're in like the insert function and you're trying to do this on your own what all of these text boxes actually mean. Definitely use Google. Definitely use the Excel training center that is available through Microsoft. It will explain it in explicit ways just like I did to you, i.e. how I prepared.
Something real handy that you looked up is if you have a master sheet, but you need to present, say to a stakeholder or certain portions of it, instead of cutting and pasting and moving it to another sheet at the bottom, you run some real nightmares by doing that. So if you use the VLOOKUP, even if you went back on your master sheet and you had to make some changes or you had to clarify some things, that's going to transfer and make your second sheet accurate. So it's beneficial to not just cut and paste if you're gonna have to present or you're gonna be giving, you wanna narrow down some of the data that you're showing somebody.
Totally.
That you use VLOOKUP instead of just kind of cutting and pasting, because if you have to go back and change anything in your master sheet, then you have to go back and remember you gotta change it every place.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
So, I highly recommend VLOOKUP. It looks cumbersome, but once you get the hang of it, you don't even have to go into the lines. You
Yep.
can just hit your brackets and type in exactly what you need, very quickly.
So Deanna knows how to code in VBA, if you have any questions. You know how to code in VBA.
Yes.
I'm being facetious. She doesn't actually know how to code.
Yes.
So was that helpful? At least maybe on the example side, it might help when you have an actual data collection sheet that you're using. The last thing we're going to walk through is called pivot tables. Does anyone have any thoughts about pivot tables? Other than they sound terrifying. I know. Okay. So I have to tell this quick story just because I think stories are fun. My stepmom is an accountant, and I remember like in biology lab in undergrad, I was trying to do something in an Excel spreadsheet and just completely screwing it up. And so I was asking her for help with Excel, and she goes, just use a pivot table. And I was like, I don't think so. And she like very quickly went in there and did it and found the answer for me in like 5 seconds. And I probably would have taken hours to do what she had done. So pivot tables are awesome is the end story lesson from that. They definitely take a little bit of tweaking and learning, and we will actually go through it right now for you. So a pivot table is just a very quick and easy way to summarize data and to reorganize data without actually changing your spreadsheet at all. So it's commonly known as the poor man's data analysis. So all of the functions that we did, like minimum, average, maximum, you can do within a pivot table without actually having to go down to the bottom and use insert function. It's just so much easier to use a pivot table. So for the sake of example, let's say that we want to look at our different groups, so COPD or no COPD, and we want to say, okay, how many are female in each group and how many are male? How would you guys do that without doing a pivot table? Yay, we could use count if. Count if or count if? If with an S. Yes, plural for sure. So you can use count if with an S. Anything else? Would you go through and manually count now using your finger?
I'm going to guess some people would sort the whole thing by male, female, and just drag it down, and here's how many male.
Yeah. You could definitely do that too. You could also use filtering instead of sorting. So you could sort the data only with COPD showing, and then you could have it only show male. I just think pivot tables are awesome, so I'm going to show them to you guys. Okay. So in order to use a pivot table, we have all of our data all in this one spreadsheet here, one large spreadsheet. That is important for a pivot table. You can tell it to use multiple spreadsheets, but it's just easiest if you have all of your data into one worksheet, which is awesome for us. So I'm going to click the little A, or the little area between the A and the 1 to select all of my data. And I'm going to go to the Insert tab at the top and click Pivot Table, the very first button in here.
How hard can it be if it actually just has a button?
I know, right? It has a button for you to do this. You don't have to build it. The old versions of Microsoft Excel, you would have to build it yourself, which was a pain. So now Excel comes up with this dialog box, and it's asking, select a table or range. Essentially, it's telling you, I need to know where your data is. And so because I had previously selected the entire spreadsheet, I had already told it where all of my data is. And then it's asking you down here, where do you want me to put the pivot table? You can choose to put it in your current worksheet that you're working off of, but again, I find that really clunky. You're messing with your worksheet in the way that you have everything organized already. So I almost always click new worksheet in order to put the pivot table into a new worksheet. I click OK. I'm going to zoom. Ooh, this is not what I wanted. I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can see this. Can you all see this fairly well? Oh, God. All right, can you guys see? Okay. So there's 4 fields to a pivot table. And these, if you'll remember, are actually all of your column headers that we had in the spreadsheet before. And we are just going to drag these column headers to the different fields or the different boxes down here to create a pivot table. It's as simple as that. So you might be wondering, okay, what do I drag where? There is a filters button or a filters option from in here. So this is a place where you can also apply filters. If we wanted to do that, for example, I could drag gender down to filters, and at the top you'll see that gender popped up here. And if I click the little arrow, I could have, you'll have to click select multiple items here. I could unclick this, and I could have only male pop up, whatever I would want. That's a good place to do filtering too. I actually don't want this for this example, so I'm going to click on this and then drag it back up, and it completely gets rid of that. This is also why I like pivot tables. It's just relatively easy to drag and drop and play around with things. That's the filters. This columns box here, this is our groups of interest. So if you imagine looking at a table 1 in an article that you're reading, what does that baseline characteristics table look like? What are you trying to compare? Which groups are you trying to compare? So for our example, we're trying to look between our COPD groups. So I think we have that coded in here as group, I believe. So I'm going to drag group down to columns. And you can see that, ooh, now we have a column for COPD, now we have a column for no COPD, and then we have a column for grand total. And I guess we have some blanks. And then, so in the rows field right here, this is the variable of interest. This is what you're trying to measure that is different between the 2 groups. So for us, we're interested in looking at the differences in gender, so I'm going to grab gender and drag it down to rows. Oh crap, I think I have it. Weird. I wonder why it's only doing male. I think I have it filtered. Well, I undid it. Yeah. Hold on one second. This shouldn't happen if you mess with it, but. I'm just going to delete it and make a whole new pivot table all over again. Because I have my males and females showing here. Select the whole thing, insert pivot table, new worksheet. Okay, group is going to go in columns, gender, rows. Okay, I don't know what happened, but here we go. We have some male and female action going on here. Okay, so now, that definitely came out differently than I anticipated. Okay. So now all you've done to the pivot table is tell it, okay, this is what I want in my columns and this is what I want in my rows. That's all you've done to it. You actually have to tell it what you want to put in the middle here. So we could drag a lot of things to this values field here. We could be comparing age in male and female patients between COPD and non-COPD. We could do a lot of different types of analysis using the pivot table. We're just going to keep this simple. I'm going to grab gender again, and I'm going to drag it down to values. Okay, so now we have a nice little pivot table here where we can see, okay, in the COPD group, we have 23 females. We have 63 males. So we have a total of 86 people with COPD. So essentially, we just combined, like, I don't know, 4 to 8 different count if or count if statements into one pivot table, if that makes sense. So again, poor man's data analysis. This is a quick and easy way. Those of you who are doing your own data analysis, listen up really quick. This is a really quick and easy way to make a 2x2 table to perform chi-square analyses if you need to build that table one yourself. So the chi-square analyses is what you would use to compare whether there is a statistically significant difference between the COPD and non-COPD groups here. And you would use that using the data pack in Excel that you would download. But this is how you would easily build that 2x2 table that you would need to do that. Do we like pivot tables now? Are we afraid of them still? Okay, yeah, I'm seeing some head shaking. Okay, we'll do some other cool things with pivot tables just so I can impress upon you the true value and amazingness of pivot tables. So I'm going to drag everything back up here so we can just start over with a clean pivot table sheet. So let's say, for example, that we wanted to look at the average metoprolol dose at discharge between our COPD and non-COPD groups. So what would we put in the columns? What would be, like in our table 1, what would represent the columns for this question? Perfect, COPD versus non-COPD. I'm going to grab that and drag it down to columns again. And instead, now I'm interested only in the average metoprolol equivalent dose at discharge between the two groups. So we could, I'm just going to show you this for sake of example. I need to scroll down and find that in my pivot table field. Let me move this over slightly so you can see. I'm scrolling down. Where is metoprolol equivalent discharge? There it is. That's the variable we're interested in, right? So I could drag it down to rows, but that creates a lot of confusion. It's trying to say, okay, here's all the different values for that, and this isn't really how we would look at it in a table 1, right? So sometimes you play with a pivot table and it looks really ugly and that's not what you wanted at all. So you just have to continue to play with it and continue to find what you're looking for. I'm actually going to give you the answer to this one, and you would drag this from rows into values. And this also looks really weird too, right? Like we would never have an average dose of 7,800 milligrams at discharge, right? Well, if you look at the bottom under values, it's saying, oh, I'm giving you the sum. So it's adding all of those different values that were in the spreadsheet before together to give you this. And that's not what we want, right? You would never be interested in reporting this? Okay. That was supposed to be yes. Okay, so go ahead and click the arrow next to this and click on Value Field Settings. And you can change this to average and click OK. Ah, that looks much more reasonable for an average metoprolol equivalent at discharge, right? Okay. Sounds good. All right. Any questions about pivot tables? Wonderful. So believe it or not, that is all I have for you today. I do have a meme because I told you all I'd like to give you memes. So I hope that you continue to use this as a skills tool pack to build upon for whichever careers you have next. If you go into PGY2, you may need to do your own data analysis again. If you're in a PGY2, you may need to do that for whatever job you have next, whether it's hospital pharmacy, academic pharmacy, if you want to go into research or anything like that. You will definitely need to be using Excel in your future life. What questions did you all have either during the presentation that I can answer for you? Anything?
Anything specifically about your data sheets that you're working on and how that might fit within what you presented?
I don't recommend putting away your stuff yet because we still have an activity. Sorry, you all. What we're going to do now is look at whatever data collection tool you already have built, because that was your pre-work and your assignment for today. If you have not done that and did not do that as a part of the pre-work for today's session, start thinking about how you would collect this data as a part of your research project that you've been talking about in your small groups. You can get together with your other group members. This says split into groups of 2 or 3, but you can get together with your small group if that's easier because you already know the people around you. You can talk about how you would have this data collection sheet actually looking and how you would have this all put into an Excel document. If you're not using Excel, just do this for the sake of activity to think about how you're collecting your data. I really actually recommend doing this. Even if you're not using Excel, thinking about how your data is being collected will help you when it comes to an analysis phase and thinking about how to analyze your data.
Somebody may just provide you with a data pool based on a sheet like this too. That may be how you.
Right. So, for example, Tom, who is our wonderful data scientist here at Kaiser, he is able to just log into our databases and pull a whole bunch of information and spit an Excel spreadsheet back out to me, which is really awesome. I love that he's able to do that. But we've actually also run into circumstances where the information he's able to pull is not complete with what we need to complete the study. And I still have to go back in and do some chart review to make sure we have all the correct information. So it kind of doesn't matter if you have a Tom or don't have a Tom, you still might need to use Excel.
Well, and that's why some of these, like the pivot table or some of the quick references are good too, because if you have somebody who's doing your data pull but may not be as intimate with your study, they may come up with these numbers and you're like, well, I was pretty sure I had, 500, and the other came up with 200, and did we have the parameters right? And they're not going to know that when they pull it, they just change the data sometimes. So it's nice to be able to go in and just do some quick checks with the data set that you can see to make sure, are we even talking about the right people here? Can we make sure that we've got what we thought we were going to get?
Yeah.
If you didn't, or even if you did for yourself. So I highly recommend, and even if it's just double check some of the data.
Great. All right, if there are no questions, I will definitely be circulating around, and so will Deanna, although Deanna may have less time. Oh, also we have Carrie. Tom might come down if he wants. I'm not sure, though. But anyway, we have about an hour or so, so definitely get into your small groups and start thinking about your data collection tools. That's all I have.